Hi everyone, I am here giving a video lecture on Module 6 and in particular your reading for this week, which was Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. And so what I'm going to talk about, the plot, the setting, some of the characters, and then I'll give a little bit of background as well. So because your discussion post for this week is on right here. I've pulled it up. It's on Midsummer Night's Dream. And you're doing, as usual, the same thing that you guys are doing week by week through your discussions. So, and you have the prompts here for what you want to respond to in your one paragraph argument. So it gives you the different things you can choose from. And then as always, you want to remember to respond to two of your classmates by agreeing or disagreeing and making sure you include evidence in both of the responses. I talked in my video lecture on Antigone about using MLA and quoting verse or quoting plays, and the writer's workshop from this week also talks about that. So you should be good to go in terms of how you should be quoting an MLA. Remember, we quote by line numbers rather than page numbers. And as I said in the Antigone video lecture, that whereas Antigone doesn't have acts or scenes, Midsummer Night's Dream, you will, citations should include the act, the scene, and line or lines in that. And so that would look like something, for example, if it was act 2, scene 2, if it was one line, it would be, say, line, I'm just gonna make something up. If it was like 1201, right? If it was multiple lines, it might be act scene 3-1, lines 657 through 660. So it just depends on if you're quoting one line or if you're quoting multiple lines, but you do want to include that act and then the scene number. And when you're writing, just as another note with MLA and writing about acts and scenes, writing about plays with acts and scenes, you capitalize act because the act is acts are a proper noun. So you would say act 2, scene 3, something along those lines. So you want to make sure that you're not just lowercasing that. So because it is a proper noun. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot. Before I get to the plot, though, I'll talk about the characters. And we've got a variety of characters in this play, and we have Theseus and Hippolyta. I think I'm spelling her name right. And Theseus has a long history in ancient texts. So in this play, you see a lot of our footnotes provide a lot of information on the journeys Theseus has had and what he's done, and he's been married before, but this play very much, it takes place in a Greek setting because it's in Athens. So it's in that Greek time period, although Shakespeare combines that Greek period with the early modern period in which it was written. So, for example, we have Theseus and Hippolyta are known as the Duke and the Duchess, right? That would be considered anachronistic because in the Greek period, the Duke and the Duchess terms were not used. Theseus might be called an emperor or even perhaps a king, but not a duke. And a duke is um, usually lower than a king, but in this particular play, he's considered like the highest person. And then we have the quote unquote lovers. Well, there's three main sets of lovers, right? We have Lysander. Well, before that, we have Aegeus. This is Hermia's father. And then we have Lysander and Demetrius, who are the two main male lovers outside of Theseus. I can't spell his name right. Demetrius. Still not spelling it right. There we go. And then we have Hermia. Sorry. And Helena. And at the very end, we got Lysander marries, and I always get these confused, and I just read it. Lysander marries Hermia, and then Demetrius marries Helena. So in the very beginning of the play, it is the way that it's set up is kind of how it ends up at the end, and then in the middle, there's all that kind of fairy business that happens where people get turned around. We also have in what we would call a subplot. So we have like this main plot that is constituted by these characters and what's happening with them. We have a subplot as well, and so in the subplot we have well, there's two subplots, right? There's a lot of characters in this text. We have Titania, she's queen of fairies. And then we have Oberon, he's king of the fairies. We have Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, who serves Oberon. We have a variety of fairies. I'm not going to remember all of their names. Mustard Seed and Cobweb and Peasbottom. So there's the variety of fairies who serve Titania. And then we have the changeling child who never speaks because we presume this child is quite young, but the child plays an important role, and I'll talk about that in the plot. And then we have, I'm going to highlight the different kind of sects of characters, the SECTS, or different factions. So we've got that group, we have this group, and then we've got the mechanicals, and I'm not going to remember all of their names either, but there's Bottom, there's Peter Quince, there's Snug the Joiner, and I'm going to look at my dramatis personae just to double check because I want to make sure I have all their names correct. Okay, that's right. We have Snout and Flute, and I think that's all of them. Oh, then we have Starveling. And I think that's all of them, right? Quince, Bottom, Flute, Snout, Snug, and Starveling. And those are all of our mechanicals. And our footnote tells us that mechanicals are called that because they're considered ignorant artisans. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in terms of the early modern culture. So normally people refer to the time that this was written as the Renaissance, but we don't really call that anymore. We really call it early modern, and that is approximately, there's no real date. There's kind of approximate dates, but depending on who you are, you have different interpretations of this, and I am an early modernist, so I have 2 master's degrees, and my second master's is in Shakespeare. So I work in a particular time frame, but early modern people might argue that it goes outside of that time frame, and that's fine. But it's approximately like 1450 to like 1642, but it can go as far out as 1800. And again, it's just, who's the particular scholar that's dealing with it. But and 1450 is also sometimes referred to as late medieval, because in the early 16th century, I can't remember, 1504, I think Henry VIII takes the throne, and then the Tudor dynasty sets in, and Henry's daughters are Queen Elizabeth and Mary. So, and then Mary takes the throne, and then Queen Elizabeth takes the throne, and then the Tudor dynasty changes out once Queen Elizabeth dies, and then King James comes in 1603. So we're talking about 16th and 17th centuries mostly when we're talking about early modern. And the reason people have gone away from using the word Renaissance is because the word Renaissance, which means like rebirth, has been considered to be too heteronormative of a word. So there was a Renaissance for rich white people, but there was not necessarily a Renaissance for everybody else. So there was this rebirth for a small percentage of people and a few things, but it also, by using the term Renaissance, you are also semantically leaving out other races, other economies, other positions, other, just the other. So instead of calling it Renaissance, which has been deemed too kind of patriarchal or heteronormative of a word, people go for the more early modern term, which gets away from that idea that there was a rebirth for everybody, right? No, at this time period, women are still seen as subhuman. Jewish people are still seen as subhuman. People of color are seen as subhuman. So a lot of things are seen as subhuman if you're not a wealthy, white, and usually male. There are some exceptions for some women. It's very particular, but usually the women are of aristocratic, are part of the aristocracy. So I forgot my TH there. So we're talking about the 16th and 17th centuries for this. But so these are our main characters. So we've got these three kind of plots. This is our main plot, and then we have these two subplots. And the purpose of the subplots in these types of plays are that they mirror, they reflect, and sometimes they will directly influence the main plot. So we have both of those things happening. The situations, the narratives with the fairies, and then the narratives with the mechanicals are all kind of intertwined in some way, or are reflective of in some way of what the main plot is addressing. So to talk about, I just want to make sure my highlight was off. So I'm going to just kind of, and it's not, I'll turn it off in a second. So now we'll go into a plot. I'm just going to give a bullet point kind of what basically happens throughout. I'm going to leave out, nuanced details and just go for a broad sweeping plot of what happens. So the first thing we have is that we find out that Theseus and Hippolyta are getting married. And Hippolyta is, or was the queen of the Amazons. If you know anything about the legendary Amazonian tribe of women who cut off one of their breasts in order to hold the quiver of arrows. But essentially what happens is he was at war with the Amazons, and she was a booty of war. And I'm not using that word in multiple ways. She was, something that they got out of that war, and he brought her back in as part of his triumph. And then they get married. So that always confuses me because I'm like, she seems so happy. And I think that's because in Titus Andronicus, a similar thing happens where Titus is at war, they win, and they bring back the queen of the Goths. And she's very clearly angry and vengeful against the emperor whom she marries, which is very against like what the culture would want. And I always try to use the example of like if a leader of our country were to be at war with somebody and then they ended up marrying, a very high up woman from that enemy that was our country, how would we feel about that? We'd probably be like, I'm not sure that we think that this queen of the country that it's our enemy should be ruling over us. But there's no sense that we get from Hippolyta throughout that she is upset in any way. She seems perfectly fine with the fact that she lost the war. She's no longer queen of the Amazons, and she's been taken to Athens, and she's marrying the person who conquered her. So we find out that they're getting married, and then Aegeus comes on stage and complains that Hermia will not marry Demetrius. So Aegeus is very pro Demetrius, and Hermia is like, no, I want to marry Lysander, right? So then Hermia and Lysander come on stage, and Hermia professes her love for Lysander, and then Theseus tells Hermia, you can marry Demetrius, be killed, or be exiled as a nun in a cloister. So those are kind of her options. And she's like, okay, great, I'll just die. And so then afterwards, Lysander convinces Hermia to run away with him outside of Athens in order to get married. So Athens law has no ruling over them anymore. And she agrees. And then Hermia tells this to Helena. We can presume that it's her best friend. They're not sisters or anything. And Helena decides to tell Demetrius. And so that's how they all end up in the woods together. So that all happens, and then the four flee to the woods. Okay, so then it kind of switches to the subplot of the fairies, and then so what we hear about here is the argument between Titania and Oberon. So the king and queen of the fairies, right? So Titania took a changeling child from an Indian woman, I think a votress, and Oberon is upset that he can't have the changeling, and Titania refuses to give him the changeling. So she wants to raise the changeling as somebody who will be her attendant, and Oberon wants to raise him as somebody who will like accompany him in whatever it is he does in the woods. So their argument causes change in weather, and it also causes the surrounding lands to be changed. So because of their marital issues, this affects the weather, it affects, the fact that crops can't grow, it's affecting everybody. And then we hear about how, about Oberon talks about how, okay, the people are going to want winter to be here eventually. And she's kind of like holding out summer because she's angry. They're kind of at an impasse. And so this is affecting everything. So they have a lot of power. And then at this point, we're also introduced to Puck, or Robin Goodfellow. And honestly, not my favorite character, but everybody has their own opinion. If you like them, that's great. He can be fun, but so and actually it's Oberon, sorry. What's the word I want to say? Not eavesdrop, but he watches Demetrius and Helena fight, and then Oberon orders Puck to not only get the flower, and that's the thing is called Love and Idleness, the flower for the potion, to give to Titania, but also give it to the man dressed in Athenian garb. So Oberon hatches this plan to kind of get his way, to get the changeling. And he's like, okay, I know that there's this flower because I'm all powerful and this is how I created it. And if Puck, if you go find that flower, we're going to make this kind of love potion out of it. If I put it in her eyes, Titania's eyes when she's sleeping, she's going to fall in love with the first beast that she sees when she wakes up. And then when she's in that kind of like hazy love, she's just love. That's all she cares about. I'm going to ask her for that child and she's going to give it to me. And this plan, and when Oberon sees that Demetrius he witnesses the argument between Demetrius and Helena, Oberon also, I guess, feels bad for them or believes that these are lovers that should be together. He also has Puck say, okay, you're also going to, put the drops or, of the potion in this guy's eyes, so that he'll be in love with the woman he's rightfully supposed to be in love with because she's so lovely. So Puck, being Puck, messes this up and puts the potion in Lysander's eyes instead of Demetrius, although the only instructions he had from Oberon was some guy in Athenian clothing. So, and there just happens to be two of them in the woods, and Oberon didn't know that. And then this leads to Lysander waking up and falling in love with Helena and hating Hermia. And at the same time this is going on, Oberon puts the potion into Tanya's eyes when she's sleeping in her bower. Okay, so a lot's happening at once. A lot's going on in this play. Okay, so but be happy you had this play to read by Shakespeare, because it's probably the easiest play to read by Shakespeare, and there's always stuff happening. Sometimes you'll read a Shakespeare play and you're kind of like page after page, you're like, oh God, it's going on forever. So this one, of all the Shakespeare plays, it's not my favorite play. As you guys have heard me say before, I'm a tragedy person, not a comedy person, but it's definitely one of the easier, if not the easiest comedy to read, if not the easiest Shakespeare to read. So So Lysander is now in love with Helena. He hates Hermia. Helena's very confused. She thinks everyone is playing a trick on her. And then, while this is happening, also Oberon puts the potion into Tanya's eyes as well. So, this is happening, and then the mechanicals come into the forest to practice the play that they want to rehearse, or not to rehearse, but to perform for the Duke and Duchess after their wedding. So Puck oversees this and decides to give Bottom the head of an ass, right, or a donkey. So I don't know if he does it. I mean, clearly, I don't know if he does it as a joke or if he does it so that Titania would fall in love with a beast, which is what Oberon wanted. But, I mean, there's clearly a relationship to the word bottom and ass. So it's not surprising that that happens. But so Bottom decides to do this. And then, so when Titania wakes up, she falls in love with Bottom, who like Helena is a little bit confused, but Bottom takes is much quicker to get onto Tanya's side, and Helena puts up much more of a fight when everybody starts having arguments between the four people. So eventually Oberon oversees that there are now 4 lovers in the woods and realizes that Puck messed up, and Puck realizes it too, and he's like, oh, you wanted me to give the potion to that guy, like Demetrius? Whoops, I accidentally gave it to that guy. And Oberon is basically like, you need to fix your mess. And so so Puck waits until everyone is asleep and then gives the potion to those who need it in order to fall in love back with the quote-unquote people they're supposed to be in love. That also always confuses me because I'm like, how do we know these people are actually in love or they just love each other because of this potion? But that's besides the point. So Puck fixes his mess. And so, and I mean, I'm skipping a lot in between this, but like I said, I wanted to keep this kind of rough and kind of just fundamental in terms of the plot. And so what happens then is Oberon, we get exposition from Oberon where Oberon tells Puck that he visited Titania while she was under the spell and while she was with Bottom, and he felt remorse, but he still asked for the changeling, and she gave him the changeling. So he got what he wanted, which always made me mad. I was like, he shouldn't get the changeling. So so after feeling bad and getting what he wants, he then decides to remove I'm not sure what to call it. It's not a curse, but it's we'll just call it a spell, for Titania. So at this point, Theseus, Aegeus, and others are in the woods making their way to the temple to get married. And they come across the 4 lovers asleep in the woods who wake up and realize they love the quote-unquote right people. And to make things super short, and they all go to the temple to get married. So Theseus marries Hippolyta, Demetrius marries Helena, and Lysander marries Hermia. So they all go to the temple to get married. So Titania comes out of her spell and is confused about why she is with a mortal. Puck also removes the ass head from Bottom. So Bottom is returned to his previous state. And and essentially at that point, everyone decides to go back to Athens for the post-marital celebrations, like the reception. And then we have the Pyramus and Thisbe play within a play performed by the Mechanicals, and then the fairies close out the play by, I would say, creepily joining the lovers in their bedrooms, is essentially what they say. And then Puck ends the play with a very famous monologue. The end. That's Midsummer Night's Dream in a few bullet points. So if you had any questions, there's little questions here and there that comes up, like, well, what about this? What about that? But this is just the basic plot in terms of what happens. Just to give you a little bit of background in terms of early modernity and what's going on here. So the Mechanicals, what I really like about the Mechanicals is that they're really reflective of the time period, so of early modernity. And that's because the job of an actor did not yet exist. And so at this time, the guild system was in place. So that's why we have, for example, Peter Quince is a carpenter, Nick Bottom is a weaver, Francis Flute is a bellows mender, Tom Smout is a tinker, Snug is a joiner, and Robin Starveling is a tailor. So all of the Mechanicals, each of them belong to a specific guild, specific to their craft or job. And what was common during this time period is that because the job of an actor did not exist, actors, or I should say acting, was something that was done by people in their spare time who had full-time jobs. So it was very common for grocers or joiners or masons or smiths or anything like that to do the job of acting. It is at this time in I would say the early 17th century where people are trying to make this into more of a living. And it's not long after that in the 18th century where it really becomes more solidified. So, Shakespeare had another job. He was the son of a glove maker and a sheep farmer. So, he had other work, but he definitely tried to make playwriting his main thing. And then there were some actors who were better known for acting, and they did a lot of it, but they also had other jobs on the side. And we see that, and that's what I love about the Mechanicals, it's really representative of that. The other thing that I think is really interesting, or that I really like that in this play that reflects the time period, is the discussion of parts and cues, because in the section, one of the sections that you had to read that wasn't the text, does talk about parts and cues, but this is how actors learn their lines for plays. And they were given their parts with cues, which were typically the last word or two words from the line that came before theirs. And this, so, or I should say, so they would only memorize the lines they had to speak. And this was done for a variety of reasons. So this is different. Say, for example, in today or in the 20th century or even the 19th century, where you might be given a full text of everybody's parts and you have the whole play, and then you still just learn your lines, but then you kind of learn it more contextually. Plays at this time were oftentimes put together in a matter of like 2 weeks, and that's kind of a long time. Sometimes it was shorter than that. So you don't have time to do all of that. You really just need to know your parts, your lines, and the cue. So what's my cue before I say my line? And I've actually, done acting. I've directed Shakespeare and I've acted in Shakespeare, and I've done it this way. I've done it both ways. One where I'm given the entire text, and one where I'm given just my parts with my cues. And I very much prefer the parts with the cues versus the whole text. It's just easier for you as somebody who's portraying a part. So I love that that is in this play, that we get references to this early modern practice of how the actors would, in fact, learn their lines. It's something that was done very quickly, kind of haphazardly, because they didn't have the time. This wasn't a full-time job for them, for anybody. And oftentimes they were paying for it themselves. So that's mostly what I want to talk about. In terms of your assignment, there's a variety of things you can talk about, right? You can talk about exposition or how people provide information. This can come with, from the beginning of the play. Puck provides a lot of exposition. Oberon provides exposition. Titania provides exposition. There's, a lot of complication. Climax. I don't know what I would presume the climax of this would be the marriages, but that's arguable. There are a lot of comic elements, so part of what you had to read in the bits of text that weren't the play was about satiric comedy and then high comedy versus low comedy. Just a note on that, you should notice that characters who are considered higher up on the socio-economic ladder speak in poetry versus characters who are considered not so high on the socioeconomic ladder. I'm speaking very idiomatically here. They speak in prose. And if you go and you look, and you can see this most prominently when you look at the conversation between Titania and Bottom. Titania speaks in poetry, whereas Bottom speaks in prose. So all of the mechanicals, they're the only ones in this play that speak in prose. Everybody else speaks in poetry, and that's always an indication of the social level of a character. And it's a common thing, so you may have heard that before, but it's always something you want to look out for. Even though they're speaking in prose, you still want to quote line numbers. I don't want to, and I think that's because in the Antigone video lecture I said that it was verse quotation, but still in plays, regardless of, because it's a mixture of prose and poetry. You're still using line numbers, um, rather than page numbers to quote. Um, and then, whoops, you have the setting, right? So we have Athens, a weird Athens, but we have the setting of Athens. You have what's called the Greenwood, and the Greenwood is a metaphorical space that's talked about a lot, and it comes up a lot, that describes a space, usually a forest, where characters enter and the wood transforms the character, into quote unquote what they are supposed to be. That's this idea of the Greenwood, and there's definitely that happening in this particular play, very strongly. I think it actually comes out of this play. If you ever read As You Like It, which is another Shakespeare comedy, I like this one better than Midsummer. The Greenwood is also in there. And a lot of comedies, it exists, for a variety of reasons. But this would be a space. So the space of the forest, is also the space of this metaphorical space of the Greenwood that is transformative. So when they go in there, there's all these transformative things that take place, and then they all go back to Athens. So there's distinction between what happens in Athens and what happens in the Greenwood. And then you can also write, of course, on one of the dominant themes, and there are a variety of themes in here. So that's all I'm really going to talk about. I think I'm going to be uploading probably like 2 videos along with this video, of the Pyramus and Thisbe play within a play, because this, I feel like, is the most funny part of this comedy. And when you're reading it, I've read this so many times, and I've seen a lot of different productions of Midsummer, both in person, both live and on screen. But it's not really clear how funny it is until you actually see it. So I'm going to provide some, just 2 that I found. One is actually from The Simpsons, which I thought did a kind of a funny take on Pyramus and Thisbe, and one is from a particular player group. And I might find the one from the 1999 movie version with Michelle Pfeiffer and Kevin Kline and Christian Bale and Callista Flockhart. I don't like their interpretation of the Pyramus and Thisbe play. I think they perform it a little too seriously. This is something that is really supposed to be slapstick. And it's best performed slapstick. That is an interpretation, but I am really picky about how the Pyramus and Thisbe play is performed. I'm also going to just give you a synopsis of one of the most memorable conference presentations I ever went to. Was in Virginia, which is where I did my second master's in Shakespeare, and it was a Shakespeare conference, and this professor was talking about why are there no blowjob jokes in Shakespeare, and it is a really interesting question because if you know anything about Shakespeare, Shakespeare is dirty humor. It's very dirty, it's very toilet, it's kind of 15-year-old, it's how it kind of blossomed into this snooty, fine delicacy of of theater I find funny, because if when you read Shakespeare, it's flat out dirty, and it's really between Shakespeare and the other playwrights who are writing at that same time. And I apologize for my bad language here, but what they're really doing is a pissing contest. So they're really trying to see who can be the dirtier, who can have the more emboldened and embellished, dirtier metaphors. How much can you pack into the rhetoric, so that it can be kind of hidden, so to speak, to get past the master of the revels. But a lot of dirty humor in Midsummer, and it's one of my favorite things about Shakespeare as well. And I think that, when we say Shakespeare, we think high poetry and high comedy and high tragedy and high this and high that. But yeah, there's definitely some incredible writing that's happening in Shakespeare. But when you start dissecting it, you start to see how dirty it is, and how kind of real it is. And I think that's hilarious. So I'm just going to post that. It just offers and this idea of why are there no blowjob jokes in Shakespeare. The professor focuses on the Pyramus and Thisbe scene, in terms of where these types of jokes might happen. And he recreated, with actors on a stage, the scene with the wall and Pyramus and Thisbe talking through a hole. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to say too much. But anyways, feel free to watch the videos. I think they're entertaining. I laughed at them. And I hope you enjoyed Midsummer. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving week. And I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.